So I am going to be ranking 10 of the books I read in March. Are these the top 10? Are they the bottom 10? No, they're just a random selection that I decided to select because I have power and I'm wielding it, and these are the 10 books that I felt I had more to say regarding, primarily because I read them towards the end of the month and actually remember what happened. Starting at number 10 of the 10 that I've picked, but it's around 12 of the 14 books that I read, is a book called Machinehood, which I picked up while I was in India. That's not relevant, although it is by an Indian author, I believe. But I kind of just wanted to flex that I've been to India. I'm a well-travelled little English, Scottish, British boy. What happens in this book, I hear you ask? Well, it's a near-ish future sci-fi set around 100 years from now, and as the title suggests, we are dealing with robots. The cover also suggests that, which you will be able to see, but I cannot see because it will be edited in post me filming this video in the way that things occur. What am I saying? Robots occur, and they are in the book, and they are essentially rising up. The machinehood is rising up. There's a machinehood manifesto, which is their design. It's a manifesto. You know what a manifesto is. I'm not going to explain what a manifesto is. It's a manifesto for the robots. And this book was fine, but I had some major gripes with it, and these are very much how I felt rather than critical issues with the book. Primarily is the fact that we have a substantial progression in technology, in the economy, but I really see a social regression that I felt was fairly unrealistic. We firstly have religion as a major part of this book, and if you look statistically, especially within developed economies, the number of people who are religious is going down. That's just a fact. So to have it be a pivotal part of a sci-fi book set a reasonable distance into the future felt weird to me. It didn't really fit, and it felt quite unrealistic, and it kept kind of pulling me out of the story. And going hand in hand with this, we also have this social regression in that one of the major plot points of this distant-ish future sci-fi book is the fact that there is a couple, and the woman wants an abortion, and the laws within society mean that she must get permission from a man to get this abortion. And it wasn't particularly well handled, and it felt out of place to me in something so progressive from a technological and economic perspective to have this social regression. Maybe that's just me being optimistic. I mean, if we look at the reality, there is a repeal of women's rights happening, and also just other rights as we as a society sprint backwards for reasons that I cannot begin to fathom. But personally, I am a broadly optimistic person, and I like to think that this is a bit of a blip. Sure, some members of society are idiots, and they will inevitably vote in idiots. However, statistically speaking, again, the majority of these idiots are on their deathbeds. They are old, and they will die, and society will become better. This is kind of a messed up thing to say, but also statistically factual. We've delved quite a long way from discussing this book, and I think we're just going to move on to number 9 now, rather than whatever the hell I'm talking about, which is somewhat relevant, but not entirely. At number 9, we have The Frog Princess, which was recommended to me by a Tinder stranger as part of my Tinder chooses my TBR video. Go and watch that if you want to put yourself through it. And this is the inspiration behind the movie The Princess and the Frog. Obviously, I say obviously I had no idea that it was the inspiration behind that movie until someone told me. So it's not that obvious if you're dumb and stupid like me, but it is obvious from an objective standpoint. And it's about this princess who cannot really do anything right. She is not like other girls, but not in an annoying way, in a moderately charming way, especially because this is a middle grade book. It's not attempting to delve into that trope in the way that people have problems with it. But she kisses a prince who has been turned into a frog, anticipating, inevitably, that the prince will turn from frog back into prince. In actuality, she turns from princess into frog, and her and the prince leap around and do froggy things for the remainder of the book. And this was charming, it was fun, it was fine. It's sitting at 3 primarily because it didn't give me anything particularly, and I enjoyed it, but moderately. And, you know, the fact that I don't have a tremendous amount to say, I think is the reason that it's at 3 stars. The previous book I had a lot to say about, and that's the reason that was at 3 stars, but it was because the things weren't necessarily good. Do you see where my mind is working? Vaguely working. It's not fully functional, admittedly, but you get me. Perhaps you don't. Who the fuck knows? I don't think I get me. At number 8, we have Red City. This was very YA. And I do mean that in a derogatory way, unfortunately. I don't typically like to use YA in a derogatory way because I am a massive fan of YA and I think that it can be brilliant, but it falls time and time again into certain pitfalls, and one of those pitfalls is being really tropey, really predictable, and just failing to excite, going for what it perceives as fun rather than actually developing things that I personally as a reader want to see developed. And this is a typical example of that. The world, I will say, is fantastic. It's very reminiscent of Jade City, Colour City, haha, funny joke, don't know what I'm saying. I just needed more. I just needed the characters to have a little bit more depth, to be a little less, dare I say, yes I dare, irritating. And I just kind of read a chapter and knew what was going to happen because it was predictable. I'm sorry. Yeah. A friend recommended this to me and I'm kind of hoping they're not watching, but they did say, oh, it's not predictable, wait until you find out what happens with this person. And I said, is this what happens with this person? And that was, in fact, what happened with that person. So, I genuinely did predict what happened. Like, whatever. It's basic. Basic. At 7, we have The Book of Fallen Leaves. This was an arc that I received. I have said on this channel before, it has been described by the publisher as Shogun meets Game of Thrones. Did it reach those peaks that were promised to us? I mean, it's at number 7 in the list, and not really. I'd love to say it was knocking on the door of Game of Thrones, but actually it was kind of standing at the edge of the yard, looking into George R.R. Martin's house in a kind of stalkerish, creepy way. This book's 450 odd pages, I believe. It's pretty short, and we have 4 major POVs and a scope that the author wants you to believe is greater than it is. A kind of faux complexity, this idea that is very complex, but actually when you bite into that meat of the burger, it's not a very thick burger. I've used a lot of metaphors there, and I myself am not entirely sure they make sense to me, but I'm hoping that you as a viewer have somehow been able to untangle what I mean in order to find some kind of meaning there. You probably haven't, but what the fuck? I mean, having 4 POVs in such a short book, you fail to develop some of them, and this happened. There were 2 POVs that were much, much stronger for me than the other 2, and I'd much rather he'd gone to the 2 shit ones and focused in and written a tight story. People underestimate the power of a really tight story. Instead, they go for this kind of depth that comes from width rather than from actual depth. The tighter you go, the deeper you can go. Let's not think about the phrasing there too hard. At number 6, we have Carmilla. This is 100 pages long, very, very, very short, very tiny, and so I'm not going to discuss it in too much detail, other than to say I think that it's really well worth a read if you are a fan of vampires. And I think that's all I'm going to say, because anything I can say would really spoil it. It has this wonderful atmosphere to it, this fantastic gothic oldness to it, and it is old, so that kind of makes sense. But it's worth just sit down, give yourself a couple of hours, give it a read. You'll probably find yourself enjoying it. You might not. Don't blame me if you don't. It's your fault for having bad taste. Witchmark I have at number 5. This is a fantastic exploration of war and draws magic into the kind of mental health aspect of war in a way that's really, really, really interesting and fantastically well done. Again, it's quite short in length, so I don't want to give you too many details, but if you enjoyed Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, then I would say this is better, but similar, but better, because that book dragged, and this book doesn't have time to drag because it's tiny. At number 4, we have This Inevitable Ruin by Matt Dinnerman. Oh my god, I almost said by Dungeon Crawler Carl. I say that every time. This is the 7th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and the final entry that we have thus far. I could go into my feelings about this, but I mean, it was 7 books into a series now. I continue to enjoy it. I continue having a little bit of an issue in that we are feeling a little repetitive in what we're doing. I have, of course, high hopes for book 8. I was going to email the publisher begging on my knees shamelessly for an arc, but I think the audio experience is just so good, I'm just going to wait for it to come out and read it with everyone else like a normal person, rather than feeling in some way superior because I crawled on my hands and knees and got an arc from the publisher. At number 4 and number 3, we're doing them together, we have the next 2 books in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire. These are fantastic novellas that are just so brimming with whimsy. The first book in this series is brilliant, and I highly recommend checking it out if you enjoy whimsy. And if you don't enjoy whimsy, you're lame. Whimsy's great. Whimsy's fantastic. That's why we read fantasy, for the whimsy. That's why I read fantasy, for the whimsy. And the dragons. Love a dragon. The first book is set in a home for children who have come back from adventures in other worlds and are essentially looking for their way back to that other world where they felt they belonged. And they're dealing with a lot of emotions around that, as you would be, and also everyone thinks they're insane, so they go to this home, and there are some real weird kids there because they've been to some real weird worlds and experienced there and adapted to the cultures there and the way of doing things there, and they don't come back fully normal. Brilliantly written, brilliantly set out. just executed fantastically and whimsical. Wonderfully, wonderfully whimsical. Okay, at number 1, and I'm aware that there's no number 2. That dog is rude. And the reason there's no number 2 is because I cannot count. And I genuinely don't know how this has occurred. And I'm going to sit down and work it out. But there's no number 2. But if you want a random... I'm just going to insert a random book I didn't read in March here, actually. For reasons. At number 2, we have The Way of Kings, because it's there, and it's brilliant, and you should check it out. It would be number 1 if I'd read it in March. Fucking hell. At number 1 is a fantastic work of fiction. This was a reread, and it is The Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. And this is actually a near future sci-fi that happens in the near future that follows an author who is not having the best of times, and she, down on her luck, decides to write a different story, to write a sci-fi story, and we have that sci-fi story woven into the narrative. If you're a themes reader, I'd say read this. Also, a really good recommendation for people who tend to read more literary fiction, who want to get into the sci-fi genre. This is a good way for them to dip their toe in, because it really does read as a more lit-fic book than a sci-fi book, but it has those sci-fi elements that keeps me, as a primarily sci-fi fantasy reader, really engaged. And Okorafor is a master of her craft. The character work in this is incredible. Everything about this book is incredible. I can't express enough how brilliantly this book is written. How just read it.